All right, I guess I'm supposed to wear this thing. Can everybody hear me okay if I just speak without a microphone? Hopefully the Army guy in me helps cover that. Plus, the microphone will certainly interfere with my desire to give my presentation through interpretive dance. I'm just kidding. That would be a terrifying event for all involved. You'll find I have a difficult time being serious for extended periods of time, and so hopefully I don't offend anybody. Just a little bit of background. I've spent 18 years, about the past 20 years actually, working specifically with Native American youth. I am first and foremost a father. I'm kind of a father to 100 different Native American kids every year. I'm involved in a lot of things. I'm also a business owner. I'm on the library board. I'm a domestic and sexual assault violence advocate. I'm in the military. So it's truly an honor for me to be able to be here, to have been invited here to a cause that I care so much about. And I want to thank each of you for taking time out of your day, taking time out of your busy schedules to come here so that we can all grow together in this work. I'm going to talk a little bit about education, obviously, with my background, because I've come to realize that education is the key to breaking the chains that a lot of our kids get stuck in. A lot of the cycles of abuse, and we're going to talk about some of the challenges that these kids face over the next little while that we have together. And it's been my experience that those kids who have the opportunity for a good education can really break out of that. You know, as this gentleman said before, what's wrong with these kids? Who's teaching these young men to be men and not cowards and bullies? And I think the key to that is education. I truly believe that. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the history of Indian education particularly, some of the challenges that our Native American students faces. Residential education is a solution to some of those challenges is kind of where we're going to go. Next slide, please. I want to start by giving a little credit to the title of my presentation, Education as the Ladder. My Dene colleagues in here will certainly recognize that quote, Education as the Ladder. Chief Manuelito is one of the principal war chiefs of the Navajo Nation. Did amazing things for the Navajo people for many, many years. And as the U.S. Army and others were involved there trying to eliminate basically these people, Chief Manuelito was the kind of the war chief there, and he was very resilient, as all Native peoples are. After all of the crops were burned and livestock slaughtered and the challenges that they faced there, he was able to keep his people together, to keep his people strong for a very, very long time. And they were kind of herded into a small area, and Kit Carson and those folks continued to slaughter the wild game to the point of almost starvation is what it took. And Chief Manuelito looked around and saw the condition of his family members, of his people, and he went back and surrendered. And the history is sad. You know, the long walk, if you don't know about it, look it up. Take some time to do that. But essentially, there was a time where he was one of the original signers on the 1868 peace treaty with the Navajo Nation. And then there was a time when he went back to Washington, D.C. as a tribal leader to petition the President of the United States regarding tribal lands and those sorts of things. And when he returned to his people, they all come running to him and said, What happened? What did you learn in your communication with the white people? And Chief Manuelito, being the wise leader that he is, he reached down and grabbed a handful of sand, and he threw it up into the air. And that's where this quote comes from. And then he said, "This is how many white people are out there. We cannot fight them. There are very few of us compared to them. We have to fight the injustices of our people with education. They have people out there called lawyers, doctors, engineers, and that's how we will win the battle. Education is part of the answer." And he became a champion for education. And any time you're on the Navajo Nation, you're going to see this. There's songs about it, there's movies about it. But even on his deathbed, he said, "Education is the ladder. Tell our children to take that ladder." So again, that's why I titled my presentation, Education as the Ladder. I want to talk a little bit about the history of the ladder, because I think it lends some insight into some of the challenges that we face. In 1819, the Indian Civilization Act was passed by Congress, and this provided funding to religious groups who desired to live among and teach the natives. And this resulted in mission schools. In almost any Native American community that you go to, you will find a mission school, many of these still in operation. 1879, a couple of things happened. Number one, Charles Eastman, Ohiesa was his Sioux name, was a highly successful mission school student. Kind of became the model. Hey, this is what we're trying to accomplish. He became a medical doctor and an author. Also in 1879, the government began operating day and boarding schools. So this is where the government first got involved with hands-on operating schools. The first off-reservation boarding school is Carlisle Indian Industrial School. I'm sure most of you know what that is. Interestingly enough, part of my own personal history, the U.S. Army War College actually occupies that building now. They use the same dormitories. 1892, Captain Richard Henry Pratt. This is difficult for me to talk about as much as I love I have 100 Native American kids every single day that call me dad, and I have grandkids through those kids now. But this was the mentality of the government's focus on education. Kill the Indian and save the man. And so that was that mentality initially. In 1917, the Commissioner of Indian Affairs provided the report to Congress, showed the curriculum, which was essentially half-day academic, half-day vocational. And that trend continued for a very, very long time. Progressive education moves in 1928. Quality of education in government and Indian schools is sharply criticized in a Brookings Institution report. That's called the Merriam Report, if you want to look it up. But it calls for more child-centered and culturally appropriate education, and then more of the progressive philosophy in education that was going on back at that time. So we see here 1928, so not even 100 years after Indian education starts, it's already being criticized for its ineffectiveness and for how we're not looking at the cultural aspects as we should. 1934, FDR's the Indian New Deal. A lot of us know about the New Deal. But in the Indian New Deal, there were a lot of things that affected Native Americans. First of all, Collier, who was the Commissioner of Indian Affairs, he persuaded Congress to pass the Indian Reorganization Act, and that act terminated the allotment program of the Dawes Act of 1887. That's basically how they were able to get home site leases, came from this point. Provided funds for tribes to purchase new land, offered government recognition of tribal constitutions, repealed prohibitions on Native American languages and customs. Prior to this is the old school thought of don't speak your language, cut your hair, dress like a white guy, that kind of thing. It started to repeal some of that. That same year, federal grants were provided to local school districts, hospitals, social services to assist Native Americans. At Collier's request, Congress also created the Indian Emergency Conservation Program. This was very similar to the CCC program, the Civilian Conservation Corps, that went on throughout the country. And this employed more than 85,000 Native Americans through this program. 1934 Johnson-O'Malley Act is passed, and it provides additional educational funding to schools. Many schools today still receive Johnson-O'Malley or JOM funds. 1940 bilingual text, that feels like a good thing, right? Hey, we're making progress. Texts in native languages. The whole purpose of that was to get them to speak English quicker. So that was the intent of that. In 1968, tribal colleges came into play. Does anybody know where the first tribal college was? Or what it was? I know my National Honor Society student here does, so I can't ask her. Dene College on the Navajo Nation was the first tribal college, and there's some really interesting history regarding that. Today there are 35 tribal colleges in 13 different states. 1969 here, you see the picture in the far top right over there. That's actually Senator Edward Kennedy. A report comes out called A National Tragedy, talking about the dire circumstances of Native American education and the failure of the government to provide what needs to happen. 1970 is the AIM movement in Minneapolis and other places. That was also really big in San Francisco. They started running what they called survival schools as an alternative to public and bureau schools, which had very, very high dropout rates. They focused on basic living skills and promoted native cultures. Today, some tribes are using charter schools, which we're going to talk about a little bit, to fund and operate their schools and teach curriculum based on culture and language. 1990, the Language Revitalization Act was passed to preserve, protect, and promote the rights and freedoms of Native Americans to use, practice, and develop their languages. Several other efforts have happened since then. 2001, No Child Left Behind. That should be the No Child Left Behind Except Native Children Act, if you look at that, because it showed gains in every single subgroup except for Native American children, who suffered greatly through that program. 2006, Esther Martinez, she's this nice young lady that you see at the top there in the center. Such a sad story. You know, this lady had a tremendous impact. And in 2006, Congress passed the Esther Martinez Native American Language Preservation Act to preserve Native American languages by using them as language of instruction in immersion schools. Martinez was a renowned Tiwa storyteller and linguist. She received the 2006 National Endowment for the Arts Heritage Fellowship Award from Tom Udall, who's a Democrat in New Mexico, as well as in the National Endowment for the Arts Chairman Dana Gioia. That's that picture right there of what she's receiving. And this is the thing that just was sad to me. She was actually killed in a traffic accident in New Mexico on her way home from receiving that award. So that was kind of her last picture. She was 94 years old. 2013, the State of Education for Native Students is a very large report that was shared, released by the Education Trust. It shows no improvement in Indian achievement levels since 2005. So 2005 to 2013, there's no growth whatsoever, and that's very concerning. So where are we today is kind of the question. Essentially, one of the challenges we have is decades of turmoil resulting from acting leadership positions. The average tenure for the Director of Indian Education is a few months. And it's constantly turning over. And so if you have no stability at that core leadership level, we see these challenges coming through the entire system, which has resulted in a very long, very sad history of the poorest performing schools, the poorest performing students in the country of any other subgroup. In July of 2014, Sally Jewell issued Secretarial Order 3334, which called for the reorganization of the Bureau of Indian Education. And that process is still going on right now. Keeps getting interrupted, keeps getting stalled out because of the fact that there's no consistent leadership at the top. Right now, as part of that, the Bureau of Indian Education, oddly enough, is trying to get out of the business of running schools. I don't know what the Bureau of Indian Education will do if they're not running schools, but that's their plan. They're wanting to transfer schools from the BIE to the tribes and Navajo. If you ever want to know what's going on in Native anything, watch the Navajos. The Navajo Nation, as our good ladies taught us, is the largest reservation in the country, and they're very progressive in education reform, and we'll talk about that briefly. But keep an eye on what they're doing. Right now they're in the process of trying to transfer schools to the tribe from the Bureau. And so my school is one of those where the Navajo Nation has delegated that to us to run that, and it allows us to include culture and language and some of those other things in our curriculum. The Navajo Nation on, oh boy, I'm going to lose the date. It was in September of 2016, went to Washington, D.C., and signed the Dene School Accountability Plan. Essentially, they're the only tribe that has had their own plan approved from Congress. You know, everybody has to follow those federal regulations. This is the first instance of a tribe saying, this is what we want our education system to look like, and that was granted by Washington, D.C. So, big time of change. Navajo Nation has one of their committees is a Health, Education, and Human Services Committee. They've delegated to the Department of Dene Education to create an annual compliance determination. Right now, our programs have to be reauthorized every few years based on compliance to certain regulations. They're trying to change that. The other thing that Department of Dene Education is doing is trying to assume control of the Bureau of Indian Education's office, essentially, in the capital of Window Rock. So the Bureau of Indian Education has associate deputy directors, and one of those is in Window Rock, and they are trying to assume that through tribal control. The thing that I want to highlight is this PL 100-297. So you have to get into a lot of history there, and I won't bore you with any more history. I know I've done a lot of that. But PL 100-297 is a very, very important law associated with Native American education because it gives the tribes the right to run their own schools, to determine their own curriculum. And so as a PL 100-297 program, I have a lot of latitude to incorporate culture and those sorts of things into my program. I want to talk about...
I got a question on that.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No.
But, okay, so if that is in place and the tribes say, okay, we're going to take over our education and there's no funding, if they were to get federal funding, they have to follow what the federal monies that they're getting, their guidelines. So if their guidelines say this is what you have to do, then what the tribes want to do goes out the window because they need that money in order to actually run a school, so they have to follow what that federal guidelines say, correct?
Okay, so the question essentially was, if that funding is received through the federal government, and the tribes receive that funding through the federal government, does their plan essentially go out the window because we have to comply with these federal regulations? This is what makes that signing of the Dene Accountability Plan so profound and historic, because now it doesn't. Now what that is through Indian self-determination and some other laws, they've essentially said, okay, Navajo, you've got your own school system, here's your money to run it. But up until that point in time, they had to comply with No Child Left Behind, correct? Or I can't remember what the new one is. ESSA. But now, because they signed that in September, that Navajo school system, the Dene Accountability Plan, trumps that. So the funding is set aside for Native education, and that's already been approved by the president to, they've created their own structure. Great question. Great question, because that's a trap that a lot of Native tribes fall into. Is, yeah, you're a sovereign nation, but you're going to dance at the end of the string because you need the money, right? Good question. So I want to talk briefly about, we're going to get depressed for a minute, sorry. But we're going to talk about what my babies face. I have all these kids that call me dad. And this is what my kids face. Highest poverty rate in the country. 27%, 37% for Navajo, and over 50% once we get onto some of the reservations. Highest unemployment rate, it's over 30%. And again, so a lot of these statistics are going to be focused on Navajo specifically because I work with a lot of Navajo kids. That's the bulk of my student body. Highest rate of child mortality. For Native Americans as a group, 59 out of 100,000 births result in death. The general population in the United States, that's 29 out of 100,000. Very, very statistically significant there. Highest rate of suicide of any other group. I don't think that's any surprise to anybody. The leading cause of death for Native Americans 15 to 24 is suicide. It's 2.5 times the national average. And over 16% of youth in Bureau of Indian Education schools report suicide attempts in the previous 12 months. Violence accounts for 75% of deaths ages 12 to 20. Included in that, sadly, obviously, is a lot of abuse, homicide, those sorts of things. I know it's no surprise to anybody who took the time to come to this conference that Native Americans are victims of violent crimes over 2 times the national average. Disproportionately to any other subgroup, those crimes generally come at the hands of somebody of another race. And when you add alcohol to the mix, it increases another 40%. I don't know what it is about getting drunk and beating up an Indian, but that's a thing. Lowest life expectancy. 55 years old for Native Americans versus a national average of 78.74. Broken homes are the norm. And I think this is why so many of these kids call me dad. Native American children are less likely to live with 2 parents than all U.S. children. Native women are less likely to marry and more likely to divorce than all U.S. women. 8.4% of kids in foster care are Native American, even though only 2% of the population of kids are Native American. Highest school dropout rate of any subgroup, 54% overall. That's double the national average. Some studies as high as 68% on the Navajo Nation. That comes right from the Navajo Nation's Economic Development Report that only 32% of their kids complete high school. So good job, National Honor Society. Lead the charge, girl. Top reasons stated for dropping out: lack of parental and family support, home and family problems. Again, this comes back to your comments earlier. If the family history, the family tradition is abuse, no education, those kinds of things, that's the conversations that are going to be around the home. When I come home from school and want to do homework, and that's not a priority for the family, you're going to get discouraged pretty quickly. Highest rate of teen pregnancy. Some interesting statistics here. 66% of Native American high school young men report being sexually active versus 49% of the national average of other subgroups. For the young women, it goes down a little bit, but there's still a significant disparity. 52% of Native American young women versus 43% on a national average, which results in the highest rate of teen pregnancy. 59 per 1,000 versus 42.5. Again, statistically significant. And then as you can see here on the bottom picture, an all too often scene that we see specifically in border towns. You know, your Page, your Flagstaff, Shiprock, some of those border towns, you'll see people passed out everywhere. Highest percentage of binge alcohol use. Talk briefly about making a difference. It's my feeling that significant challenges that are outside of a kid's control should not preclude them from success, should not preclude them from opportunities. And that's where we step in. We have I believe, a sacred responsibility to step in and help these kids. Having been a young man who grew up in an abusive family, and I remember leaving in the middle of the night to get away from that, and growing up in a home with a single mom who was never there, not because she didn't want to be, but because she was trying to feed us. There were 3 boys, myself and my 2 younger brothers. Both of my brothers dropped out of high school in 10th grade to sell drugs. They've lost almost everything to alcohol and to drugs. But I had caring teachers that made a difference for me. Beginning in Head Start. Little teeny kid. Didn't know where his next meal was going to go, so he went to Head Start. And I firmly believe that that saved me. So I think we have a sacred responsibility to help these young people, to give them opportunities. Our students face significant challenge. They have a tradition of resiliency, and I think that's something that I really want you to remember. If you don't remember anything else that this crazy guy up here said today, remember this. Native kids, Native people are the most resilient people on the planet. They've faced extermination since the 1400s. And it doesn't matter whether we herd them into a reservation, whether we stick them in a boarding school and try to take away their language and cut their hair and forget who you are. They are resilient and beautiful people, and I think we can tap into that. And I think we can tap into that not only for these kids in schools, but for their abused mothers. And I appreciate the work that each of you does to do that. There are success stories happening every day. We looked at some depressing statistics, but let's not forget that there are successes every day, and many of them are the result of your work, of your efforts. If we can stabilize the environment that these kids find themselves in and provide opportunities and resources, we're going to see maximum exploration and growth. As people, we are naturally curious, right? How many little kids do you talk to who want to grow up to be homeless? When you ask a 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old, what do you want to be? It ranges from fireman to fire truck, really, right? Anything's possible. And then at age 5, we go to school and we realize, I don't read as fast as that kid. My wife tells the story of walking into the classroom, her first grade or kindergarten classroom, and wondering, what are all those things around the top of the classroom? What were they? Alphabet. And why do all these other kids know what that is? So at 5 years old, we start to compare ourselves to other people a little bit, right? But if we provide the right opportunities and tap into that natural curiosity, that natural anything's possible, amazing things happen. Research has shown that wealth planned, well-funded, well-operated residential programs provide a safe, structured, stable environment that results in significantly better outcomes in every metric. Obviously, I'm going to talk a little bit about my program because it's what I know. This picture here in the center is Carlisle Indian School, which I talked about being that first school. Again, it's still an active campus. The U.S. Army still owns that campus. And when I go to school to be a general in a few years, Carlisle Barracks is where I'll stay at the U.S. Army War College. Pretty amazing. But the gentleman in that picture, if you go back, holy cow, drug tested driver. So this is the same young man in both of those pictures. This is arriving at school. This is mid-year. Next slide. So why does it matter? Historical trauma, and Annette's the expert here that can talk about historical trauma. We all know it's there. Parents and guardians' perceptions. Unfortunately, there's a history of bad boarding schools, right? Who has, my native friends in here, who has bad boarding school stories? Who has grandparents who have bad boarding school stories, right? Cut your hair, don't speak your language, scrub this with a toothbrush. That kind of stuff. And so a lot of people, when they think of residential programs or boarding schools, that's what they think about. That's their mindset. Unfortunately, a lot of people in positions of power who hold the purse strings, some of them think that way as well. And so because of that, programs are in danger, and we need these types of programs for these kids. Right now in my population, in my school, on any given day, 87% of my kids, that's what it was when I looked at the numbers last week. 87% of my kids from a broken home that included abuse and some sort of substance abuse. Both factors. If they were only from alcoholics or only abuse, physical abuse or emotional abuse, I didn't count it. Only if they had both, and I got 87% out of 100 kids. Sad, right? So I think residential programs are needed. Here's why we need quality programs. There's going to be, all the pictures that you see throughout here are for two purposes. Number one, so you don't have to look at me. And number two, to keep your interest and show you some of the things we're doing. These are all my babies. I love them all. Residential programs exist to level that playing field. For the first time in some of these kids' lives, they come home and there's a caring adult who's not going to harm them, who is concerned about what they did during the day. Hey, I know you were really worried about that math test. How did you do? Let's sit down and study for tomorrow's science test. Can I help you write your English paper? Hey, let's go get ice cream together. We're leveling that playing field. Provide support and structure that's not available in the home. It gives access to opportunities that these kids may not otherwise get. I had a kid come to my program about 5 years ago, and we were driving to an activity that I was taking these kids to. I was taking about 8 kids to a symphony. And I was just asking the question, getting to know the kids early on, and asked, so now why did you leave the Navajo Nation and come here? And she said, oh, I really like music. And there's no music programs in the schools that we go to. And I heard you guys have a music program. Actually, we're partnered with Juilliard. If you know anything about music, you'll know what that means. We have a partnership with Juilliard. So those opportunities that they couldn't get at home. Positive peer culture, you can kind of see some of the other things here. Next slide. So we'll ask the question, what makes a quality residential program then? How do we transition from that, cut your hair, don't speak your language, scrub stuff with a toothbrush, to what we're providing kids today? Number one, they understand where the kids are coming from. They have that right perspective. They understand developmentally what is right for a teenager. Where should this kid be processing-wise? They're comprehensive and symbiotic. Everything works together for the best interest of the kids. They're consistent. They include heavy amount of peer involvement. They're logical. They're structured. They excite the kids. They're backed by research. They allow for creative strengths, understanding not everybody in the room is going to be a physicist. They understand that your gift at mathematics might be exhibited through weaving or other traditional means. They hold kids accountable. I can't tell you how many times on the phone I tell a parent, I love your kid enough to hold them accountable, because I know when they leave here, the world will. And I want my son to be a good man. And he needs to understand this is not appropriate. Sometimes those hard conversations have to happen, right? And sometimes parents won't have those. A few things that you can see here. I thought it was interesting that you talked about our friend, Mr. Vice President there. You can see our kids there with him that's at the Utah State Capitol in the middle. We provide a tremendous amount of opportunities to share culture for our kids. I'm going to transition a little bit and talk briefly about our program and what we do for kids, just so you can kind of see where we're coming from. Again, my background is in counseling and in domestic violence and those kinds of things, and so you can see how I infuse some of that into the program. It said on there a model program. The reason it says that is because that's what the Navajo Nation says. That's what the Bureau of Indian Education says. They say Richfield's our model residential program. So this is kind of how our program is put together. You see here all of these things working in tandem for our kids. So it's not just academics. They're not just showing up to go to school. There's also a social component. There's a cultural component. You cannot speak a native language without connecting to spirituality. It's just how the languages are. There's a relationship with everything around it. I understand a lot of Navajo, but my lazy white tongue doesn't do a very good job speaking it. But you can see here, all these pieces have to come together, and they have to come together symbiotically. You know, if we're focused only on academics, we're going to miss that cultural crisis that kid's going through. We have full-time counselors there to help support these kids. Most important thing probably is that they're student-oriented and student-driven. We have a student council called the Action Team. They create activities. They structure the rules of the program. They help rewrite our student handbook and the rules that go in that every year. It's choice theory driven if you're kind of a therapist or psychology type. Very growth focused. We focus very, very heavily on growth and what helps kids to be successful. Prepares kids for real life. I can't tell you how many times I have people come through in their 60s and 70s. Our program has been in continuous operation since 1954. But almost every day of the week I have somebody that stops by and says, this is what I learned here. Because learning how to live in a multicultural environment for the first time in your life, where not everybody next to you is native, or doing your own laundry, or living with a difficult roommate, all of those things apply later in life, right? As we go out and we get jobs and we have that difficult coworker, and we're like, I remember that roommate that drove me nuts, I can do this, right? We have highly trained and motivated staff as well. That's a big thing for us. Actually going to be hiring if anybody's looking. Next slide. This is kind of, if I could boil it down to two words that capture what we provide kids, it's opportunity and support. We provide kids with opportunities that they can't get anywhere else in the country. I know that because I used to be the chairman of the National Residential Committee. I was over all residential programs in the United States, and I know what we offer is so far and above what other programs are doing. So there's a lot of truth to that one of a kind. Most up-to-date technology, comprehensive support system. That support system includes positive mentors. One of the things that I think is missing, and again was alluded to in discussion earlier today, is where are the positive male role models? Now, I didn't have one growing up, and so I'm kind of winging this dad thing, right? Trying to figure out, okay, what would I have wanted in a dad? But if I can have a successful Native American male role model, and I have several on my staff, that makes a big connection and a big impact on these kids. I have a good friend who is a MD. He's a doctor in our town, and he's from the Pueblos in New Mexico. He's native. He's single, by the way. I keep trying to hook him up with some of my staff. Good-looking guy. He's highly successful, and he volunteers a tremendous amount of his time to come and just spend time with our kids. He takes them hiking. He takes them rock climbing. And that's important to me because it provides a positive role model, something that's missing in their day-to-day life. And when they go back home, and maybe the only men they see are passed out on the couch or chasing mom around the house with a belt, those kinds of things. Now we have some positivity. Hey, this guy got out of that and became a doctor or a teacher. We have counselors, teachers, tutors, coaches. Probably the most important one, though, is positive peer leadership. If you know anything about developmental psychology, we know that the most significant influences in these kids' lives are who? Their friends. Other kids, right? So as parents, what do we want more than anything? We want our kids to pick good friends, right? You know, I have my 100 kids that I spend the most time with, but there's also 2 that live at my house. An 18-year-old young man and a 15-year-old young woman. And I'm very concerned about who their friends are. So guess who they hang out with? They go to work with Dad. Native friends. There you go. Next slide, please. I want to talk briefly about our academic program, just to kind of give you a feel for what that's like. Next slide. Our students have access to classes, resources, and programs that aren't available anywhere else. And when I talk about some of these, you'll see what I mean. We provide professional tutors in every discipline. Kids have unlimited access to those tutors. So we bring in tutors in every single subject to help these kids with their homework. Monday through Thursday, they study with these tutors for 2 hours. But the kids have unlimited access, so if they have a big math test coming up that they want to study for on a Sunday afternoon, all they have to do is say, hey, can I get a math tutor here on Sunday? And then they can study for that test. The other thing is peer tutors. We take some of our top students and we pay them to tutor their friends. They're there doing their homework anyway, and we pay them to help the other kids with their homework. Now, the benefit to that is twofold. Number one, these kids learn better from their peers. But now this kid has value. Now this young woman doesn't have to take her worth from a Snoop Dogg song that says she's only got one thing of value. Now she understands, I'm really good at math. I'm good enough for math that they picked me and they paid me to help other people. It creates confidence, and it creates a positive path. We have school liaisons that go to the schools and advocate for our kids. We have post-high transition assistance, career and technical education, concurrent enrollment programs. We teach Navajo language, Navajo government to make them eligible for tribal scholarships. I talk a lot about Navajo, right? And that's just because historically we were a Navajo program. Any kid can come as long as they have a CIB. We have kids from multiple tribes. However, because our program is a PL 100-297 program funded by the Navajo Nation, we include in our curriculum Navajo traditions, Navajo culture, a lot of those kinds of activities. Next slide. So this talks a little bit about our Career and Technical Education Center here. One of the things that I really like about this is it's very hands-on, and these kids can start as early as freshmen in high school taking classes in engineering, robotics. They can take classes in greenhouse management, veterinary assistant, medical programs. My son is in the EMT program. He'll be a licensed EMT by the time he's done with school this year, which is going to help him in his search for a job. There are 15 different disciplines there, and they're wide-ranging from commercial arts type programs to advanced mathematics programs and STEM type programs. New courses are added every single year. The one my daughter is most excited about, and 2 of my boys at the dorm are most excited about next year, is sports medicine. They want to be physical therapists, and they can start working through those classes in 9th grade with a Full-time, the guy's full-time job is as a physical therapist, but he blocks out half of his day every other day to teach this class to these high school kids, to let them know, hey, here's the type of classes you're going to want to take, here's the path you need, and it gives them hands-on to see if it's something they really like. For example, I had a young woman who, a young Hopi girl, absolutely loved animals. Who doesn't, right? Loved animals, and so she wanted to be a veterinarian. Took the veterinary assistant class, loved everything she was learning, and we got her hooked up with an internship. She just could not give those poor little puppies shots. You know, so it helped her save some time, right? Next slide, please. One of the things that's interesting is that we have a partnership with Snow College, which is ranked as the #1 two-year college in the country, not just in Utah, not just in Richfield, not just, you know, #1 college in the country. This is where our partnership with Juilliard comes. And when our students hit 11th grade, we can currently enroll them in Snow College courses. So it is actually possible for our students to graduate with an associate's degree 2 weeks before they get their high school diploma. We pay books, tuition, fees, all of that for the kids. So these kids who are motivated and focused on that college track, it gives them a 2-year head start and about a $30,000 savings to do this, because we started in 11th grade. The other thing is, not every kid is college bound, right? There's a huge issue right now in our country of people who are making French fries with a bachelor's degree. Can we go back? And back.
You know, I'm left-handed and I'm forced to do this right-handed.
Oh, there we go. Okay. So
That's my stupid excuse.
but we may get to this interpretive dance thing. I don't know. So my point being, a lot of kids are feeling like they're kind of herded into that college path, and they may not be college-minded, right? And so now they're making fries at Burger King. And we have a shortage of skilled trades. We have a shortage of welders and electricians and plumbers and contractors and roofers, right? How long did it take you to find someone to finish your building, right? Those jobs are there. And so we have certification programs in the trades as well. So we sit down with every kid when they come in 9th grade and say, what do you want to be? Now, I get it. When I did this with my 18-year-old when he was in 7th grade, he'd always wanted to be a doctor. Then in 7th grade, we sat down in that little teacher meeting and they asked, what do you want to be? And we're like, okay, here we go. We're going to have the doctor talk. Horse rancher. We about fell out of our chair. I was like, we don't even have a horse. We have motorcycles with horsepower. Grandpa's got horses. Where'd that come from? And then in 8th grade, he wanted to be an engineer. And then he wanted to be a physical therapist. And then he broke his hand as a team captain on the wrestling team and missed his junior year competing. And in that process, he met an orthopedic surgeon that he works with for 4 hours every single school day right now, doing surgeries, doing clinic visits, and now he knows what he wants to be. But we sit down with our kids twice a year and say, what do you want to be, so that we can structure those classes. Because if that 9th grader wants to be a welder, we're going to steer them in those classes and start them welding in 9th grade, so that when they hit their 11th grade year, we put them in advanced certification programs. Had a kid last year who was, his junior year, he took welding 1. He got his certificate. I don't even know what's going on over there. You guys all looking at me all cross-eyed. I'm like, man, I have a Janet Jackson wardrobe malfunction. Like, what's going on?
Sorry.
I distract myself.
Take your hand away from it.
Anyways, this kid, he gets his welding 1 certification. He gets all his certifications, and he goes back to Kayenta, actually, and works with his uncles. And they kind of travel around the western U.S. during the summer. He makes good money. Comes back his senior year, gets his level 2 certifications and some other specialty certifications, and starts getting phone calls in April about the same time. He had 4 different job offers in 4 different states, making double what I made. And when they said, we need you now, we'll help you relocate, and he said, oh, I can't come right now. They said, well, we'll pay for relocation. What do you need? What's going to get you here? He said, well, I'm still in high school. They're like, whoa, time out. How do you have all of this experience? How do you have these certifications? So again, it's something very unique. One thing I'm very proud of, and this was back a couple slides, but our students this year alone will earn 236 college credits. No cost to them, no cost to their families. That's more than 2 bachelor's degrees. That is significant. College and vocational assistance is very big deal to us. See, they started moving, so you guys stay awake. Because me standing in one place is hard enough. But it's a big deal. This is a big piece of where my counseling element comes into play. We spend a lot of time with our students. My requirement of my staff is every senior will have a senior portfolio. It includes, their awards, their certifications, specialty classes. It includes letters of recommendation from teachers, from people that they've done internships with, because it just helps with their college application process. We will talk about outcomes here in a while, but the vast majority of our students graduate with a scholarship to the college of their choice, and that's part of why we do that. We help students with scholarship applications. We start filling those out September of their senior year. Career counseling, financial aid stuff, information about the military and other options for kids that are looking at those sorts of things. We have each branch of the military, and we have various large companies and colleges come and visit our campus to talk to our kids, because we don't want them to get that sales pitch from a Marine recruiter that's low on his numbers, right? We want them to understand if you're thinking about the military, look at all of it. Look at what truly fits you. If this is what you're really interested in, maybe this branch is better for you. We want them to be educated. Post-high transition planning is a big deal for us, keeping track of where our kids are, what they're doing. Personal issues, it's a big deal. When these kids leave home and they, for the first time in their life, not everybody around them is the same. Not everybody speaks the same language. And for the first time in their life, they're a minority. There can be some adjustment. And so we have counselors to help with that. A couple interesting things. So the bottom picture there is our students in a horticulture class. So they planted these seeds at the beginning of the school year, and they're learning how to manage greenhouses, how to grow crops, and they transitioned that knowledge a month ago at the junior prom by making the boutonnieres and the corsages for their friends. They were able to do that and sell those. So they were able to take that from a seed, learn how to grow it, what plants I need, and then turn that into an income, essentially, at the end. And so everything's very hands-on for us. Next slide, please. And one more. I talked briefly about cultural programs. Again, we're funded through the Navajo Nation, and so all of everything we do infuses Navajo language and culture. We do presentations on clans. For example, one of the first things those kids do when we get there is we do clanship activities so they don't end up dating their cousin and things getting all awkward. Okay? There was one year, for whatever reason, where that happened like 2 months into the school year, and these guys kind of got this little thing going on, and then it's like, it's my cousin. It's weird. One of the things, though, I want to talk about that's important to us is not only providing the activities for our students, but our students have the opportunity to be ambassadors to the community. Again, as I said, we've been there since 1954. I get phone calls every single week. Hey, can you have some of your students come and teach our little 8-year-old Cub Scouts about the sacred mountains? Can you come and teach this group of elderly ladies how to make fry bread, or about the cradle board, or about your oral traditions? And that's something our kids love. They love it. And they should, right? Very, very proud culture. I mean, why are we hanging on to Eminem or Snoop Dogg and making that our culture, when we have such a powerful culture that we can grab onto? And now we're men, because now we're warriors. And we understand that a warrior doesn't just mean you go around punching people, because a warrior is the most significant and selfless act. Our true Native American warriors, what were they first? They were fathers. They were husbands. They were protectors. And they laid their life down for their family, for their community. That's what it means to be a warrior. Not that rap song about running around and shooting people. That's not being a warrior. Or slapping that woman around. That's not being a warrior. But when those kids understand their culture and their history, it really makes a difference. You see here in the middle, our girls doing a basket dance. Can you see the foreground of that picture? I love that picture. Bunch of little old white ladies in oxygen, right? We're that good. You're going to pass out. You watch this. Okay. So community service is a big point of what we do. And we have developed a relationship with the 2 care centers in our community. And we go about every other month and provide a performance for them and just sit down and hold their hands and talk to them. These people who nobody visits anymore. Very, very powerful for our kids. So culture is not just something that's given to us. It's not just something that we're sharing with our kids as a program. It's something that we want them to take pride in and go out and share. You see there, the top right-hand corner. Where's my Navajos? What are they doing? Butchering. They're butchering, right? And so this is very traditional activity. And a lot of kids today don't know how to do it. And I had this little grandma, she was in her 80s, call me and thank me through an interpreter because I couldn't talk back to her. Yeah, right? Everybody's like, go, where's a mutton sandwich in St. George? But this grandma thanked me for teaching her kids what her children didn't, for teaching her grandkids what her children did not teach them. They came home and were able to have a basic conversation with her in their traditional language. They were able to help her butcher and make fry bread for a traditional meal. So a powerful thing. Next slide, please. I'm going to hurry, I promise. Residential programs. Really quickly, a couple things residential-wise that we do. A lot of the lessons, the most significant lessons that our students learn have very little to do with the classroom. You know, we talked about exposing these kids to the trades and to robotics and engineering and medical classes and those sorts of things very early on. But a lot of times, it's those daily life skills. That's learning to be in a multicultural environment. It's learning to do my own laundry. Learning to work with other people. Learning to manage my time or to get involved. Those things, teaching that responsibility has a dramatic impact in the success of students. Next slide, please. Student recognition. This is a very big thing for us. I don't think even my Navajos are going to remember President Shirley, but he's in there. He can. So we have tribal officials come to our graduation every single year and recognize our kids. Tribal delegates from all across the Navajo Nation. Jonathan Nez has been there several times. But we want our kids to be recognized. We recognize them daily, monthly, quarterly, annually. Those are some of the kind of things that we do. This is a big one. High five for teenagers. High five is just what it sounds like. Our staff carry on these pockets, in their pockets, these little tickets that just says high five on it. And you know, we see a kid hold the door open for somebody or pick up a piece of trash or any myriad of positive things. And we give these kids that high five ticket, and they can redeem them immediately for a candy bar, or they can put it in a drawing for an iPad and those kinds of things a couple times throughout the year. But the point is to get our staff as well as our kids looking for positive things. I talked about our program being student driven. Our student council also has high five tickets to recognize their peers. And you know, initially when we first started that program, people were concerned about, hey, is this kid going to take those 20 tickets and go give it to his best friend? And you know, but they don't. It's a very big deal to them. The picture, I know where I'm at. Okay, that's good. We're all good. Social programs. High school should be the funnest time of your life. And that's what in the end, that's what I'm trying to give back to these kids. It shouldn't be a time of fear. It shouldn't be a time of hunger. It shouldn't be a time of abuse. And we're trying to give them that back where they can have fun and they can be kids. Next slide, please. So some of our social programs, here's just a few things we do. Where we're located, we actually are within 1 hour from 5 different national parks. And so we visit the national parks, we hike, we camp, we fish. We do a lot of outdoor kind of stuff just because of where we are. We have a calendar. You can check it out on our website if you'd like. Every single day there's something going on, and the students are in charge of those programs. The student council determines what would be fun to do. This year we've done Fear Factor. We did, what's that, American Ninja Warrior. I mean, these kids come up with all kinds of stuff. We did Chopped, if you watch the Food Network. We do all these things that kids come up with in an effort to unify the students. We have a student family group where 2 Sundays a month we sit down with our students in a smaller group setting, more like that around the dinner table family feel, and talk about issues that are important to them. This month they're talking about what does a healthy relationship look like. We started that one in February, with love and all that kind of stuff, and it's kind of growing into what is a healthy relationship, an unhealthy relationship. Conversations you would have with your own kids, that's what that's about. Let's move forward. So I want to talk briefly about just outcomes. Does it work? Is it worth the effort? Why would we do this? A couple pictures of some of my students here. Over a 5-year average, Richfield Residential Hall has a 92% graduation rate. Basically the 2 students that didn't graduate during those 5 years ended up going home for family emergencies. I know that they graduated just at another school. So most of our years are 100%. State of Utah's graduation rate's 82.2% during that same 5-year average. And as I mentioned before, the Navajo Nation's graduation rate's 32%. We have a higher mean growth percentile. Mean growth percentile is essentially when you take everybody on their scaled scores, the growth from that initial test to the next test, right? If I have any educators in the room. Richfield Residential Hall students have the highest mean growth percentage in mathematics and language arts of any subgroup in the state of Utah. Early college exposure, every single one of our students takes college courses, and as I mentioned, 236 college credits this year alone. The cumulative GPA of our program as of yesterday was 3.03. When you take 100 teenagers, that's pretty significant. Post-high transition, like I said, every single senior has a transition plan before they graduate. This year, every one of my seniors has been accepted to a college and has a scholarship. And we still have a month of school left. Last slide, please. I did mention, not that one, sorry. I guess it's not the last one. That's at Baby Rocks, if anybody knows Dennahotso area. I mentioned that I would share a couple of things in working with kids. My background is in counseling, and I worked for, I've spent 20 years working with Native American kids specifically. But a few things that are important is, number one, understanding what's developmentally appropriate. Understanding that teenager, their body just went nuts on them, right? There's like all these emotions and things are popping out in weird places and hair's growing all kinds of, it's like you ran through Miracle Grow. Stuff just went nuts. And then all of a sudden they have different feelings about other people. They're trying to assert their independence because of all the physical and psychological growth that's going on. They require more sleep. So that teenager wanting to sleep till noon on Saturday, that's actually developmentally appropriate because their body just ran a marathon this week. And we forget about that sometimes, right? So understanding that is very important. Understanding they're at a different place. The other thing is, and you ladies will love this, girls are always, on average, 2 years ahead of the boys, right? And if you've worked with teenagers, you understand that. You can have a conversation with a 14-year-old girl that is going to make a 14-year-old boy go cross-eyed and go, huh? Because developmentally they're at a different place. You can see that physically. And there are different repercussions I guess, for early and late development in girls and boys. Very different, and that's a whole different discussion. But understanding what's developmentally appropriate, what is my kid in that range, is helpful. Help kids connect to a larger cause, because if you look at adolescents, the number one crisis, the number one thing they're trying to succeed at or work through is, where do I fit in the world? This is where, out of nowhere, people become vegetarian or baconitarian, or they want to adopt a penguin, or they want to move to Costa Rica, or save the rainforest. Finding a positive cause larger than themselves to connect to can really save a kid from connecting to that gang, to drugs, to alcohol, to perpetuating a cycle of abuse. To have a young lady who volunteers her time at a shelter makes a huge difference in her life and her outcome. Give them a voice and allow them to feel heard. Teenagers will argue with you till the sun goes down about why we should legalize marijuana. And nothing you're going to say is going to make a difference, right? And 9 times out of 10, all they want to do is feel heard. Sometimes they'll put those little jabs in there to get you in fight mode, right? Because they want a good argument. But really all they want is, gosh, you know what? That's a really good point. I never thought of it that way before. What does that say to them? You're smart. I can see you've really thought that through. Because here's the true challenge with an adolescent. What do we tell teenagers? I'll tell you what I heard all the time. I always heard, act your age. Right? Well, what the hell does that mean? I got the brain of an 8-year-old and the body of an 18-year-old. Where do I fit? My mind thinks I'm 21 and ready to conquer the world, but I don't have 1 minute of adult experience, right? So act your age is very, very confusing, and if they feel heard and feel they have a voice in setting their own rules, curfews, all of those kinds of things, all of a sudden they develop successful adult experiences to connect things to. Now, does that help when a young woman is maybe put in a difficult circumstance where a fragile value is challenged? Because now we have some experience to grab onto. Now we've been successful in making adult decisions. We're not going to get bullied by that senior boy as a naive freshman girl. It helps. One thing I want you to remember, and you'll remember this one just because of how I say it, get rid of your butt. If you can do one thing to change relationships, and this is with man, woman, child, from 2-year-old to 102 years old, get rid of your butt. It's nasty, it's dirty, it does no good. Okay, and what I mean by that, and this is especially true with teenagers, the word but creates a fight every time. You could tell somebody, I'm going to give you $1 million, but what happens? Now there's conditions on it. Here's all the things you have to argue with, right? So the phrase but automatically puts a teenager in fight mode. They turn off their brain and they start thinking of the argument back. So if you can change one thing, anytime you want to say but, say and. It's that simple. It takes a couple of minutes to do it. But when you get good at this, you're going to find a significant decline in the amount of arguments you find yourself in and in the challenges that you face with teenagers, because they're not on the defensive now. For example, yes, you can go to your friend's house, but you need to do your homework first. Right? Do you see how a teenager is going to hear that from that perspective? But now there's conditions on it. You don't organize structured risk-taking. What the heck does that mean? Okay, I'm a very outdoor-oriented person. You know, I rock climb, I skydive, I scuba dive, I motocross, all those kinds of things. But kids are invincible, right? Well, it's not going to happen to me. That's why they don't wear seatbelts. That's why they don't wear helmets. That's why they're all in the emergency room. Wondering, wait a minute, it's not supposed to happen to me. But if you can organize that structured risk taking, take that kid rock climbing with all the appropriate gear, now they're going to be successful. They get that adrenaline, they get that rush that they're seeking, but they found out how to do it safely. That's a big deal. These last three, though, are very, very important to me. Love and lead in every action. Kids, specifically boys, and I'm going to put my plug in here, my little soapbox. We're in a crisis as a country, in my opinion, what I've seen. I struggle being able to hire young men because I cannot find them with the qualifications that they need, because they're all in their parents' basements playing Xbox. They don't go to school. Over 60% of young men who start college drop out before the first year is over. This year I had a waiting list of 20 girls wanting this opportunity in my program. I had 12 vacancies on my boys' side. We're in a very difficult place with young men, and I think we're going to pay the price. Because if that young man is learning how to become a young man by playing Grand Theft Auto, we're in trouble, right? And if you don't know anything about that game, I don't want you to stomach it or anything, but you get points for beating up hookers and killing cops and that kind of thing. That's how they're learning to become young men. That's their developmental process. We're in trouble. But if you can be somebody worth emulating, you can be that hero, you can be that person that they look up to. But wait a minute, I thought we were looking for role models for young men. Can a woman be a role model for a young man? Absolutely. And I can tell you that I'm proof of that. The most significant people in my life were my grandmother, my mother, and my great-grandmother. Every man in my life let me down. Every man in my life was involved in alcohol or abuse. But those women showed me a better way. And my love for those women made me want to be a good man. And so I think that being someone worth emulating and loving and leading them in every experience we can is going to turn that around. Turn that crisis around. Because I guarantee you, at 4 years old, that little boy's not thinking about dropping out of school. That little boy does not want to hurt mommy's feelings. I remember at 5 years old, and I don't know why I remember it, but I distinctly remember at 5 years old having the realization, I'm the man of the house. I have to keep my mom safe. And by 7 years old, we were gone. All out of love for my mom. There's no way I could have ever protected her, but that was my mentality. And I think we can give that back to kids because we have cultural resiliency. We have a history of being fighters. We have a history of being survivors. And that is that positive role model that those kids need. Honest answers to tough questions. Hugely important. Next slide. The slide you thought would never come. And I never danced. Sorry. Any questions? I know I went through a lot of history and I talked about education a little bit. We kind of went through a little ride of, here's what history has done, and education is our route to success, and talked a little bit about my program. But I hope you don't feel like this was a conversation or a didactic diatribe about Richfield Residential Hall, because that's not what it's about. I mean, I used, obviously, my program as a background, but hopefully that's applicable to what you do. Whether you work in a shelter, work with kids, whether you work with abused women or men, or whatever the case may be, that there was some applicability there. Thank you for your time.